Today on An Imperfect Leader, our guest is Dr. Amy Galloway. Now, Amy has been a teacher and a school leader in Nashville, in Philadelphia, and in New York City. And as a principal of a neighborhood school that was among the lowest performing elementary schools, the bottom 5%, she and her staff, they moved it to the top 5% within 4 years. Amy, welcome to An Imperfect Leader.
Thank you so much, Peter. I'm so excited to be here.
Well, it is so nice to meet you. And I didn't mention, but I will now, that after the principalship, you moved to the state level, the Tennessee Department of Education specifically. And there you led the professional learning networks with principals, assistant principals, and principal supervisors. So really a lot of the roles that superintendents often play and also reach out to others to help complement their skill set. So I'd like to start there if that's all right. Tennessee has many urban centers, right? Nashville, Memphis, Chattanooga, Knoxville, and it also has many rural areas as well. And so I'm curious, what were some of the opportunities and challenges that you noticed educators were facing?
Yeah, absolutely. And worth noting that my time at the department was immediately post-COVID. So I started there in June of 2020 and was there for 3 years. And so I think the challenges are certainly specific to that context and that timing. One of the first ones is definitely leader isolation. And I'm speaking specifically about principals here. And I don't necessarily know that this was different post-COVID than pre-COVID, but I do think it was intensified for leaders given the sort of emotional weight that they were all carrying for their schools. And this is one that I think is incredibly interesting, specifically looking from the principal lens, because, in Tennessee, we have lots of principals, something like 1,700 principals. And so there's a lot of people in this role. And when you are in this role, it still feels incredibly isolating because you're the only person in your building who's doing the role, who's doing that job, right? And because you are carrying this emotional, intellectual, the weight of your school and your school community and your teachers and everybody who you support. And so it feels intense. And so isolation is very real. The second thing is quality development. And I see this one specifically in the Tennessee context in that we have a very robust teacher and leader evaluation system here. And I think generally speaking, it's a really good thing that we have that. But one of the challenges of having such a robust evaluation system is that there are these formal mechanisms that need, things have to be checked off. The evaluations have to be done. The meetings have to happen. And so that work is consistently executed. And so sometimes the additional development, the coaching work, the alignment around, okay, you had an evaluation, what was an area of focus for you? And how do you get some support in that area of focus between evaluation cycles? That can tend to fall off. And people tend to kind of think about evaluation as development. And not that's a bad thing necessarily, but if the evaluation is the only development, then it creates a challenge for people. And so we really saw a lot of leaders who wanted and needed kind of additional development around their skill set. And then the third thing is that this was a time where lots of new initiatives were being rolled out because, post-COVID, learning acceleration, everybody wanting to do everything possible to improve outcomes for students. And so, things like new HQIM implementation, tutoring, lots of big initiatives. And kind of repeatedly, I think principals were often missed or almost worked around in this implementation process. Instead of working through principals, lots of times systems work around principals with the best of intentions because the principal job is significant and they have a lot on their plate. And so people don't want to burden them. And what that creates, though, is this challenge where the principal is not the leader of something in their building, but the people in their building expect them to be. And so it just creates this new layer of challenge that a principal has to navigate on the ground with their teams.
Yeah, I mean, you think about it, when you don't include the people most impacted, so in this case, they're responsible for carrying this. And even if they are not completely responsible, those in their building assume that they are, then that's where your systems sometimes fail. I'd like to go to the second point, though. I remember visiting Knox County, visited a really cool STEM school just about downtown Knoxville. And it really was the impetus for our school district for creating a STEM and arts middle school. And what I really found compelling about that school was how much learning was done and lifted by children. I mean, it was sort of a real shift in how instruction looked in terms of teachers being facilitators of knowledge, not just being that sort of sage on the stage. And at that same time, even though there was such just inspired teaching and learning going on in that building, a teacher took me aside to talk about the evaluation system of, being evaluated as an A through D, and how even though that they were highly rated, they felt that was problematic. Were we doing that in our state? And so it's always just sort of stuck with me. And so when you talk about evaluation, it is, accountability is an important piece of any job that we do, right?
Yes.
And of course it raises that affective filter of stress because it seems almost like a character assessment. The way you just described it is really about how do you do this not as one summative, but rather support all along and then providing that support when they need it. And so I just wonder if you'd explore that a little bit with me.
Yeah, I would love to. And I do think this is one of the kind of places where I take a pretty strong stance that doesn't always agree with other educators. A lot of times our systems are such that you can't be a coach and an evaluator, and people feel very strongly about separating those two. Not everybody, but lots of times in education, that's a common mindset. And I just deeply disagree with that. I believe I have seen to be true that our most effective leaders are coaches and evaluators of the exact same people. And that this idea of, this ongoing development journey that everybody is on, coaching and evaluation are both key actions that take part in that growth and development journey, and that they can and should be sort of executed in partnership with the same leaders. And that's the most effective way to actually do that work.
I think as long as you're really clear on what role you're playing in that moment, so that someone knows that if you're coaching and you're asking reflective questions and sitting back and allowing that productive struggle, or you're saying, in this moment, I'm consulting with you, I'm in that evaluative role, I'm saying this is what needs to be done. As long as it's really clear in the role that you're playing, I think absolutely a coach knows their person deeply, the person that they're coaching, and as in an evaluative role, know the kind of growth someone has made to be able to also say, we're making the kind of progress we hope to see.
Yes.
I've really loved learning about you, and I've loved learning about the continued work that you do through your company, Pivot, which, by the way, if you started in your role in Tennessee right at the end of the pandemic, that was like that was a verboten word. No superintendent ever wants to hear that word again, right? Oh, can we pivot? We're going to have to pivot. Do you think we could pivot? But as I read more about Pivot's work, I discovered your guiding principles, and I imagine the work that you had done previously in New York and in Philadelphia and in Nashville and in the whole state of Tennessee, that they all informed those principles. Would you speak to them for us?
Yeah, absolutely. And I will kind of give this caveat that these guiding principles are the result of our team coming together and really centering around this idea of the way we want to do our work, the principles by which we want to guide how we work, right? I think for me personally, some things that I've really kind of anchored my journey as an educator and a professional are the importance of people, the importance of systems, and the importance of doing what we say we're going to do in a really high quality way. And when I think about people, the relationships, the experiences that people have, and the fact that, our field is one where it's like we truly get to be a part of people's stories and their lives. And it's exciting, it's amazing, it's humbling. But I think it's important that we acknowledge that because it, I think, gives us a little bit of a weight and a burden that we have to be honest about. And, we are responsible for a better part of students' experiences because of all the systems we create and execute and because of all the people who run those systems and do that work, right? So I just think that is so important to call out. And then I think about context, and when we talk about challenges and why something is why a challenge exists, why something is a certain way, I just think the context really matters, and the larger system in which that thing is operating really matters. And I think especially for our work at Pivot, we are partners with organizations, with districts, with CMOs, with schools. And so technically, we're outsiders. And I think it's just really important as an outsider to understand the context in which you're working, to understand the history of that context and that space, and making sure that we're just really having open, honest conversations about that and the way that's showing up in the challenges we're trying to navigate together. Yeah. And then I think the last two about raising the bar and owning it, these just really speak to the importance of doing what we say we're going to do, doing it really well, and that we don't have time and space to kind of make large commitments if we can't follow through on them or won't follow through on them. And that's just a really deeply held personal value of mine too.
Owning it, when I hear you say that, I mean, it really makes me think of just the ability and the power of being vulnerable, of saying, owning it. And sometimes I refer to it as being a lead learner, sort of accepting and then moving forward together, as opposed to avoiding. And it really speaks to integrity as well, I thought. I mean, when you said do what we say, it's a level of integrity. If you're just joining us on An Imperfect Leader, my guest is Dr. Amy Galloway, an educator, a leader, and the co-founder of Pivot School Improvement Leaders. In the human-centered leadership model that I use to advise others, we aim to impact the cultural field inherent to any system, whether principal thinking about your school or a superintendent thinking about the entire system. And I was reading your Building a Strong Team Culture resource, and I saw the quote, "Every team has a culture, whether intentional or not." So what advice would you give leaders who have entered a cultural field that is inconsistent with their values or at odds with where the school community wants to or needs to, where it needs to go?
So I think this is a tricky one. And I think this is an especially kind of prevalent problem right now, or prevalent challenge right now.
I was going to say, I mean, this is what I hear over and over. I've inherited a system that got through the pandemic and then made very few changes afterwards. Even though there was a real compelling reason to do it, it just seemed insurmountable. And now this next generation or next line of leaders really doesn't have the ability to sort of wait. I mean, there's an urgency. And so, so when I saw your work, I thought, let's explore this a little bit. Not that you have all the answers. So it's tricky.
Yeah. Yeah. You use the word urgency, Peter. And I think that that just so deeply resonates. And, we discuss that with our leaders a lot. I will say that our kind of niche area of focus is with principals who are working to make a significant improvement effort in their schools. Several schools have like federal improvement designations and are, what you might call our language from maybe a decade ago is like a turnaround situation, right? And so this is very common in our work. And we talk a lot about naming where things currently are, where we want things to be, and what the path is to get there. And we use that reflective thought loop. Where is something? Where do I want it to be? What is the path to get there, on a really large scale and on a small scale, right? And we can use that process, that thinking process, when we're talking about cultures. And I think the real work happens in what is the process to get there. And usually that needs to involve some really honest conversations with community. And when I say community, I mean like teams of teachers, students, family members, other kind of community partners that might have a vested stake in something, potentially district leadership, depending on the structure and system, but really honest conversations about where things are and where we want them to be. And then really identifying, okay, what does it look like and sound like and feel like for something to be the way that we want it to be, for this culture to exist the way we want the culture to exist, and developing, what is that vision? What are those values that kind of drive our actions when that culture is what we want it to be? And then doing the really strategic planning work of like, how do we go from where we are to where we want to be? And using a pretty just concrete model around, what are the strategies? What are the actions? Who are the owners? What are our targets along the way? And how are we going to monitor progress there? So we use a pretty sort of basic strategic planning framework that helps leaders just do this work in a concrete way and make it accessible, make it bite-sized, narrow the things that they're focused on each year so that they don't have a million priorities.
Right. We didn't get here yesterday, and we're not going to get out of it tomorrow. Although at the same time, I mean, in reading about the work that you've led along with your staff to go from the bottom 5% to the top 5% really speaks to not acceleration as much as a real intentionality. So having a really clear plan on how to do that. And you mentioned students, which a lot of people, I think, sometimes forget in terms of including them in the conversation. And so I started to think about, you're in New York, you're in Philadelphia, you're in Nashville. Sometimes families who have felt historically underrepresented in decisions being made at their schools may not get completely involved, even though they have some ideas on how to go from where you've been to where you are to where you're going. And I'm curious, what might have been some ways that you included families and students in that work?
I mean, personally, when I became the principal of my sort of last principalship, my 5 years in Nashville, I knocked like over 200 doors myself just to have lots of conversations with the community.
You don't have to come to us, right?
Yes.
Right.
Mhm.
So comfortable
Mhm.
being a presence, and to whatever level that you're comfortable in my being in your home, right? Because
Yes. And I think, I think it's everything, right? It's the walking neighborhoods, asking people, it's going to community meetings, it's creating the space at school and having those meetings at school. It's the surveys, it's the, being present at arrival and dismissal and just having casual conversations so that people know you, trust you, build a relationship with you. And so as a result, they feel comfortable sharing their thoughts with you. And I think it's also really important to have the formal mechanisms in place, right? What is the routine on which you're giving the surveys and getting the formal input, and how are you reporting back out what you've learned? So I think it's both the kind of formal systems and the informal routines that really matter in this. And I think, in my work with leaders now, a piece of this is we happen to work with a really great group of leaders, all of whom have these strengths and how they navigate things with people, and it's, having a circle with you and 10 family members like might be a little bit uncomfortable, but you can do that. And it's actually not that big of a deal. You just call them, you invite them up, you sit in the circle and you ask them what they think. And you've got the skills to do that, right? And
just
so
the
piece of this is-
intentionality of a circle, right? Meaning
Yes.
that not
Yes.
one person is at the head.
So a piece of this is just naming, and not that leaders don't know this, but again, they have so much on their plate. So helping them remember, what are the easy ways that I can do this? How did I do this when I was a teacher? How did I get my kids' input when I was a teacher? It's those same things, just, set up a little bit differently.
I love it. I'd like to ask you a question that I ask every leader who comes on the podcast. How does the term an imperfect leader resonate for you?
The most obvious definition absolutely resonates. This idea that we are all on our own journeys and that leaders are growing and wrestling and learning all of the time. But I will say, I had this mentor he's still an important kind of professional and personal voice in my life. And he used to say this phrase, Amy, this is the work. This is the work. And he would say it when I was saying things like, "Oh, if only this person would kind of get it together and do what they needed to do," or if only we knew this 3 months ago, then we wouldn't have done this thing. Or why don't we already have a system for this? Like, why are we here? And he would kind of meet my reactions with, sure, it's not that there's no value in asking why. And this is actually the work, right? It's not that we're trying to do this work to get to some other work. Like, this is the work of leadership. And so having this mindset that something should be perfect or someone should be perfect or everything should kind of already be figured out is just counter to what the work of leadership actually is. Like, leadership is working through it and figuring it out, no matter what the variables are in front of you. And I just love that. And I say that all the time. And I don't always embrace it as much as I wish I could, but I really work hard at embracing that.
We're back for segment 2 of An Imperfect Leader called Imperfect Leadership in After Action. And my guest today is Dr. Amy Galloway, an educator, a leader, and the co-founder of Pivot School Improvement Leaders. Now, in this segment, we ask our guests to deconstruct a decision that they made, and then we talk about it. So, Amy, what happened?
So I had a school year where I made some particularly bad hiring decisions. And for a variety of reasons, one of them was a teacher decision where I really didn't have a good option. And one of them was a leader decision where I was doing something that was best kind of for the broader organization. And I'd prided myself on being someone who was like good with people and good with having direct, honest conversations and good with consistency and performance management. So, even in hard situations, I could see myself through them. I had the skills to see myself through them. And this one, it just started being hard basically from the first day of professional development that summer. And the level of kind of negative impact on the team in terms of like things inconsistently being executed at the leader level, and then just this kind of constant gossip or toxicity that happened in the teacher situation. It started right away, but it grew, and it grew quickly such that, we start school here in Tennessee in early August. And so I don't know, four weeks into the school year, things were really complicated already. And so I knew I needed to start being pretty aggressive and direct in how I was navigating the situation. And I did, and I thought I was doing everything I could. And I was leaning on my leaders and my support. And I look back on that, and I think there's a lot that I wish I would have done differently. There's actually objectively
Was one of them, this is the work of leadership. Why didn't I do this? Okay, so let's talk about, so it sounds like you're in a position, you're making a hire, and almost immediately the introduction of this new leader personality is already creating a ripple effect that is not the most positive. So it's creating sort of a toxic look. And so let's talk through, I guess our second question is always what got overlooked. So what got overlooked?
I think I didn't listen to my gut. Like the things I knew, my analysis in the interview process was pretty accurate. But, you're going through an interview process and you never really know, even when you use the rubrics and you have the criteria for success and you go through the process and you execute it consistently, but you get to the end and there really is this gut call of, is this the person, right? And I think in this situation, it was 2 hires in the same year. And I really didn't listen to my gut. And I felt this pressure of I needed a full staff so we could start the school year. And I let that pressure of wanting to be fully staffed to start the year I let that pressure get to me in a way that made me make a decision that didn't align with my gut in terms of people being aligned with our work and our mission and being able to show up in a way that honored our culture and our values. And I think that is what happened. I let this pressure get to me and I felt this idea of perfection. I need a full team to start the year.
Yeah, well, I mean, there is a stress about if I start understaffed, that puts more work and responsibility on people who already feel like their plate is a platter. And so, when you were looking around the room as you were evaluating, I imagine you had a team of colleagues who were helping you. Did you sense that there was, well, it's your choice, Amy, we're not totally sure, or there was sort of an enthusiasm moving forward with the hire?
Well, definitely the first one. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, I wasn't the only one who was reading the situation that, we're not sure about this.
Right, but I owe it to our family, I owe it to our kids that we're going to move forward, we're going to hire this person. Yeah.
Exactly.
What did you learn about relationships throughout this process, or what new relationships were formed as a result of it? Because I'm mindful of your thinking about where we've been, where we are, where we're going kind of thing.
So I want to speak to the relationship between like me and kind of the people who were advising me.
Yes.
So thinking about my leadership, because this is where I've really had a lot of reflecting on this situation specifically. I think I wanted somebody in this moment. It felt so hard. I wanted somebody to tell me what to do. And I didn't quite trust the people who were telling me what to do. So this recognition of what I wanted wasn't possible in the context of the relationships that I had. And I wasn't aware of that at the time. And I think what I needed was somebody who was going to say, telling you what to do is actually not my job. I'm going to ask you questions. I'm going to help you reflect on this strategically. Think about where you are, where you want to be, and how you get there. And you've got to make this decision because this is the work of leadership, right? This is your team. You've got to make this decision. And that's what I needed, but I didn't know that I needed that at the time. And so it makes me think a lot about the role that, we play now. And I have a direct coaching caseload. And so the way I want to show up as a coach of principals and the importance of that relationship and the trust. And sometimes people are very clear about what they want and need. And sometimes people are less clear about what they want and need, but their wants and needs existing in the context of a trusting and supportive relationship is very important.
Oh my gosh, I wish I had met you in my earlier years as a superintendent. It was in the early years of the superintendency where I had opportunities to add people to leaders to my cabinet. Your gut says something and you move forward. And I wish I had somebody who also said to me, look, this is your decision to make, but let's talk through what is it that you need and will this person actually bring that for you? All these other competing perspectives and advice and interests that are telling you what you're supposed to do may not fully understand what you're seeing down the road. And so you feel compelled to make a decision that in your heart you knew wasn't the right one. Yeah. Absolutely. But boy, do I wish I had met you many years ago. What frustrated you in this situation? So sometimes it's a system that, we say what got overlooked and it's, well, I didn't have a clear system or there wasn't a clear system in terms of going through. And then what frustrated you is sometimes what was my role in this? What could I have done differently kind of thing?
No, when I look back, I really did not act as swiftly as I could have when things started being challenging. And I do feel really frustrated that I allowed sort of behavior that was so counter to our school's culture to continue to exist within our school. And I had put a lot of emphasis on building this culture and been so intentional about it for the 3 years prior that I really look back and I wish that I would have acted more swiftly to really sort of honor the culture that we had built together.
And you're an educator. And so you're like, and we're in an institution of learning. So you keep giving feedback and you keep thinking and hoping that things are going to get
Exactly.
better, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly.
But in the end, then, what was something that was good that came out of this situation? And it can be what you're doing now in terms of coaching and supporting and consulting with leaders, because I imagine you've taken that learning and have applied it to the new relationships that you have.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely that. I also think there's this piece of feeling confident in the idea of trusting your gut. I think this is one that was a really hard thing. And I can very concretely look back and say I didn't trust my gut. And had I would have made a different decision. And so that's helped me in my, I'm a pretty analytical kind of drive with my head. I mean, I use my heart, don't get me wrong, but I'm a planner. I analyze things and really listening to the way our bodies help us make sense of all the information we're taking in is also important. And so this is one that I think really helped me learn that lesson, in addition to for sure impacting the way that we think about the trusting relationships and the context in which we want to support and work with our leaders, for sure.
I imagine also in the end, you had to make a difficult decision and you made it. And that the rest of your staff and the community at large got to see that you made a decision. They may not have understood all the circumstances behind it, but that you were able to return to the cultural field that you had curated and cultivated so intentionally. And that probably also elevated that people just had that trust that you were going to take care of that community with the integrity that you spoke of, as one of your principles.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
What advice would you give to an aspiring leader?
There's a lot here.
I know. I know. It's only 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 words. But so someone is thinking about going into either the principalship or making that next step of then supervising principals, and sometimes that's at a central office level, or even pursuing the superintendency, being in charge of an entire system. And collecting advice along the way as a part of this work, I think is important. So not all of it, but what's one piece of advice? How about that?
I think being someone who reflects regularly and puts yourself in the center of the reflection is incredibly important, because as leaders, we need to be really self-aware. And, at certain points in our career, we get the gift of really direct feedback from a ton of people. But a lot of time, leaders don't always get direct feedback and understand sort of how people perceive them or what they think about their leadership or their effectiveness or anything, right? And so I think we've got to take it on ourselves to develop that self-reflection piece. And I think it's hard, or I guess it's easy to focus on executing and doing the work. And there's so much work to do. And so that takes all the time in the world. And I think it's on us to be disciplined and really do that reflection of, how did I show up today? Did I show up in a way that aligns with my values? How did I send messages about how I think and feel about all the people I share this work with? And is that the way that I wanted to, right? And I think I'm certainly somebody who I try to do that a lot. I wish I would do it even more. And sometimes I wish I would start my day with that. It's like a proactive reflection of how do I want to feel at the end of this day, right? In terms of how I showed up and how I communicated these messages I really care about. So I think that just that habit of self-reflection and this idea of who we want to be and how we want to show up and making sure that we're reflecting on whether or not we do that.
I love that. I just keep going back to where have I been, where am I, and where am I going? So how do you wake up in the morning and say, okay, where was I yesterday? Where do I want to be today? And then where do I want to be at the end of the day? Our guest today was Dr. Amy Galloway, educator, leader, and co-founder of Pivot School Improvement Leaders. And Amy, I wrote a number of notes, but the first thing that I sort of want to reflect on is you highlighted the fact that leadership is incredibly isolating. Whether you're a principal or a superintendent, there are very few people who are doing the job that you're doing. And they don't have all the information and they have to trust. And the way that you build trust and cultivate trust, I think, is living through those principles that you talked about, really knowing your people and being human-centered and really being consistent with the systems that you build and that you continue to do. And then being willing to have that sort of iterative process of, I'll use the word pivot when necessary. I prefer to use
that.
I know. You know what? I prefer to call it a mid-course correction. Is that okay? So, but more than anything, this is the work of leadership. And so thank you for teaching me that phrase. And thank you for doing the work and for training others.
Ben Spiker, my former principal once upon a time.
Well, Ben, thank you very much. Thanks so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
It's so nice meeting you, Peter.
Yeah, you too.
Have a good one.